A few episodes ago on priorities, we talked about the state IT workforce and the challenges officials are facing when trying to attract a fresh, excited, and motivated workforce. We spoke about how budget and cost constraints are limiting how state IT shops attract and retain their employees. But something we didn't get a chance to cover in that episode was what to do once states have attracted the workforce they're looking for. Specifically, how do you align your IT talent to key project initiatives to ensure you achieve optimal IT service delivery? This is Priorities, coming to you today from the annual conference of the National Association of State Chief Information Officers here in Orlando, Florida. Today, on our special edition episode, we'll again be talking about human resources and talent management. We've talked about the fact that states are having a crisis of attracting the right folks to public service, but how do we build a workforce of the future? That's our main question today. One of the common threads to everything that we talk about on priorities is workforce. You can't tackle cybersecurity or cloud computing or agile software delivery or consolidation if you don't have a strong, well-trained workforce. On today's episode, we'll bring together leaders from North Carolina, Virginia, and Arizona, and the private sector to talk about some specifics on this issue. Joining us today, we have Keith Werner. He's the Chief Information Officer for the state of North Carolina. Keith, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Jake.
We also have Nelson Moe. He's the Chief Information Officer for the state of Virginia. Nelson, thank you so much for joining us on Priorities.
You bet.
Our third guest today is Morgan Reed. He's the State Chief Information Officer for Arizona. Morgan is a Priorities veteran. He spoke earlier this year on our episode about legacy modernization. Welcome back to the show, Morgan.
Thanks for having me back, Jake.
And finally, we have Richard Spires. He's the CEO of Learning Tree International. And Richard's the former Chief Information Officer for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and the Internal Revenue Service. Richard, so glad you could join us today on Priorities.
Very pleased to be here, Jake.
I also want to take a second to thank the good folks at Learning Tree International for sponsoring today's edition of Priorities. And with that, let's jump into the questions. So as I said at the beginning, we've already come to terms with the fact that states are struggling with the workforce, right? They're struggling to get people here, but where I want to start is on the question of evaluation. How are you assessing the state of your workforce in terms of how well prepared or equipped you are to deal with the demands of the job, specifically quickly evolving technology changes, and how are you using that assessment to chart a course forward? And Keith, we're gonna start with you.
Sure, Jake, as you're well aware, we have legislation in place that allows us to create a new unified cabinet level Department of Information Technology. So it actually provided us a great opportunity to do a workforce assessment and see what we're looking at moving forward. So we've created the operating model under the transition, or in the transition, and we have the exercises underway now to do those assessments and how that in particular fits into our workforce.
That's awesome. And now, Nelson, I know you guys have a lot going on with workforce in Virginia. How are you assessing the state of your workforce? How are you using that assessment to chart a course forward, especially as your IT outsourcing agreement nears its end?
Well, as you know, Jake, we have the IT contract currently with Northrop Grumman, and the vast majority of the actual IT technical staff is with that company. And so Virginia has the workforce set up where the governance and project management, procurement management staff work for the Commonwealth. For us, what I do is make sure that we train them up for that particular skill sets going forward and make sure it's in their annual training efforts. The area we probably will see some demand is as we grow our cybersecurity and audit and now audit functions. We're staffing up in that area. We have yet to start. We've got authorization to do it. Now it's looking for staff. That might be an area where we'll have some difficulty attracting talent, and we'll have to get back to you on where that is. But that's the one workforce spot we're thinking about. That'd be hard.
Sure. And Morgan, let's turn to you. What are you guys seeing in Arizona? How are you assessing your workforce, and what are you seeing generally across the entire workforce?
So we've had some new leadership come in. I've been in place about 11 months, and we've hired a new Chief Technology Officer and Chief Strategy Officer. So those guys come from the private sector as well, and they have a different baseline, different definition of good than potentially their predecessors did. So they've sized up their organization, made some changes, and also attracted some talent that we probably couldn't have got before they came in. Right now, it's not so much our people prepared to do the job they were doing yesterday, but more so, how are we prepared to do the jobs that we're going to be doing tomorrow? As we look to bring in transformative technology, new SaaS and enterprise class tools, we are going to have to transition our workforce through training, through vendor credits and some of those things. So right now we're in the assessment phase of really assessing our technology and the platforms we need to use going forward. Then we're going to be aligning the people, and if we have good people, we want them to stay around, even if it's potentially shifting focus a little bit. But we haven't done any formal people assessments because that'd be premature, kind of where we are as a state right now.
That's interesting. And Richard, I mean, you bring to the table not only your experience at Learning Tree, but just a ton of experience in general. What are you seeing across the country on this issue, and how are folks assessing the state of their workforce and using that assessment to move themselves forward?
I would say, Jake, over the last 5 years, I've seen some very positive trends that I could have used back in my federal service. So a couple things. First, there's now some leading frameworks that have emerged to help organizations in determining competencies and also positions. So the Skills Framework for the Information Age, or SOPHIA, is one of those frameworks, as well as something out of NIST in the cybersecurity world, the National Cybersecurity Workforce Framework. And these really help you determine the kinds of roles and competencies you need. Then on the other side is, okay, you've got that, what about what you have currently? And ourselves with other organizations now provide more and more of these kind of automated ways in which you can assess staff. You can really determine the skills and abilities of your existing staff. And it's not so much as a gotcha exercise. It's more about once you've determined that and where you see gaps in your workforce, then you can put in the kind of learning plans, including training and mentoring and job assignments, to be able to get your staff from where they are today to where you'd like to see them.
Wow, that's good. And so, I mean, we talked earlier, kind of in that intro about how workforce is that common thread to everything. Every priority on the state CIO list, workforce is an important part of it. And Morgan, in the past we talked about the challenges your state faces with things like legacy modernization. But how are you preparing and training your workforce now to transition into what the future of state IT will demand?
So the first item on our strategic plan, which we just published a couple months ago at the start of the fiscal year, is to build a world-class IT organization. So that's not only figuring out where our people are now, how we can invest in training and development for them, and also what are those gaps that we have organizationally that we need to bring in fresh talent for. We've had good success with word of mouth. Good people know good people. A players hire A players. So we've had a lot of internal referrals and trying to kind of talent up the state where we are. Again, our focus is more today around what technologies will we be pivoting towards. We're trying to get out of our on-premise data center into the cloud as part of our legacy modernization. We're not trying to forklift any servers from where they are now to necessarily another building or another provider, but rather, as those refresh cycles come up, look at the business impact of those servers, what service are they delivering to the agencies, and then going out and looking at, if you were starting over in 2016, what kind of platforms would you use? We'll probably end up with some SaaS solutions and not have on-prem, which means the support model changes. We might not need people that can go push buttons on the metal. We might need people that can manage the Amazon instances and support the SaaS-based initiatives. But as we go through and make those technology decisions, whether it's contract to hire, whether it's augmented staff from the implementers, I think it's not going to be one size fits all on how we get that talent, but we're excited about the future and making sure that we have the right people to support the future tools.
That's cool, and that's going to be a fun journey to watch happen as you guys go through that.
It's exciting.
And Keith, you guys are dealing with this as well in North Carolina as you transition into One IT and the consolidation around that. How are you defining job roles to better position your employees for the future?
Well, I think first we needed to really come up with what our operating model looked like in the future, and make sure, to Morgan's point, make sure that we had the good leaders in place to be able to execute that operating model and look at our workforce of the future. We have tremendously talented people in the state. We need to make sure they are in the right roles so we can execute to that. And then also to that point is we need to make sure that we're creating a culture and an environment that people want to come to work for us. And but we have to communicate our vision, our mission as a department, as a state, how we're moving forward. Those are all critically important to creating that environment where people are attracted to coming to work for us. So all of those things come into play, but these are exciting times for North Carolina and how we're moving the needle forward with technology, and we're excited where the department's going to go from there.
Interesting. And I mean, Nelson, it's fascinating to see how all of your kind of at pivotal points in your organizations that, workforce really is coming into play. And Nelson, you're no different. I mean, with the end of this outsourcing agreement on the distant horizon, and a bunch of new service agreements coming as a result of that, how important will training and learning management be in that process? And how are you trying to get the state's workforce ready for the future?
Well, the training is very important. I'm personally involved in making sure that the training plans for the staff are analyzed and approved. We make sure that individuals understand philosophy, where we're going with our strategic plan. That's been promulgated and they've been passed out to the staff. For us, the model we like to use, because we have a separation between IT and with the vendor. Most of our staff, and most all of our staff, are primarily governance, project management, procurement. So from our training, it's focused on that. Be the best training for terms and conditions for SaaS. Be the best training for procurement processes and governance in Agile and other types of, and then finally workflow. So we focus on that. And then finally what I do is I inject what I call the ownership model. I can't pay them anymore, but I can say, you get to own this process. I'll be accountable for it, but I'm going to look to you to own it, and then they get involved and they buy into being the person that's the point of contact for that particular thing.
And I mean, Richard, from your experience, how essential is that training and preparation that we've heard from these states talk about? And how do states really need to get their staff members ready for what IT will look like in 5-10 years down the road?
Yeah, it's critically important, and in fact, I've learned some hard lessons because even in models like outsourced models, where you're not having a lot of the technical staff yourself, your ability to be able to properly oversight contractors and to really understand what's going on is key. So even in those instances, I have found that it's good to have individuals on staff. You don't need a lot of them, but those that truly understand the project management, as Nelson was talking about, and the governance, but also some of the deeper technologies and leading edge technologies as you're moving forward to those. So I have found that model can work well, and so training, bringing in the staff that has that kind of experience, and also bringing in some experts, not so much to do the work for you, but to help your staff absorb these new technologies and absorb these new practices. And, many times people will get trained, but unless they can immediately apply that in a real world environment, a lot of it's lost. So this notion of bringing in some expert help to coach and mentor, especially with process changes, can be very, very powerful for an organization.
That's right, and I want to pick up on that vein of bringing in the people to help and to really give you something that you can apply right away and really get some results out of it. And so Nelson, how are you getting your workforce up to speed with some of the other tech-related priorities that your state must work with every day?
Well, in this case, it's focusing through the strategic plan. We focus and also we articulate the next generation of the contract models we're looking for, and we make sure that we internally and externally communicate that process and sequence to get there, and then individually at the director and manager level how their staff is going to step up and respond to that. So that's a communication we have periodically with the staff.
And Richard, back to you here. I mean, we're consistently seeing this massive evolution of technology, but state IT employees don't just figure this stuff out. I mean, maybe sometimes they do, but I mean, how should states be building these learning programs around emerging technology, and how should they use these programs to get up to speed on some of the other top priorities of their departments?
It's interesting, and I will admit, when I was in federal government, I felt like, as I look back on it, we were too ad hoc. So now I look at models like, let's take the state of Tennessee, who has done a wonderful job of really setting and classifying 50 different position descriptions, have built an IT academy, and are really training across all different types of technologies, some of them legacy, but a lot of the newer technologies, including SaaS and other kinds of cloud-based technologies, as well as also not just technologies, but leadership disciplines, project and program management, but even some of the softer skills, communication skills, right? Because if you want a high-functioning IT organization, it's not just about the technology and those skills. It's really about being able to work together in an effective team environment, both with internal to the IT organization, but perhaps even more important, in as a team with your clients. Because that's ultimately where the rubber meets the road, and where you're going to end up either succeeding or failing on projects.
And I mean, Keith, switching to North Carolina, are you training your employees about what the shift toward more modern technologies means for the organization, and how are you conveying those top priorities?
Yeah, so I think it's a calculated effort when you go through this. So, we needed to modernize our classification system for IT classifications, but we also needed a calculated approach on how we disseminated our training goals to our employees. So having a good IT plan in place, having a good enterprise architecture in place, enterprise standards in place, and then driving that down into the goals of our department. We needed that to trickle down into our training plans and have a calculated approach. And frankly, we're still into that initial view of what that looks like, but we wanted to make sure it was a holistic view of how we are approaching training moving forward, and we're utilizing that investment well. And but I think as those things mature, our training program and models will mature as well.
And Morgan, in Arizona with new technology on the horizon and with an ever-changing organization, how are you conveying those top priorities to your staff?
So what we initially did is did that through our strategic plan. Just to back up a little bit, we have a private sector governor that's about a year and a half in. The challenge for us is to transform the business. It's not to incrementally improve. So what we did is we said, what does transformation look like? We put that in a strategic plan. And we went out and told our workforce that, we are going to explore public-private partnerships, whether that's an outsourcing model, an insourcing model. Ultimately, our charter is to deliver technology better, faster, cheaper to our agencies. What we're giving them isn't good enough. Now that did create some fear and uncertainty in some of the cases. People thought they were going to get rid of their jobs. One of the things that we found out, though, that we learned through this process was, some cases, like he said, we have great employees in the state. We just need to empower them with better training and tools. When we went out to visit our friends in Texas and saw what they did with a multi-source integrator, kind of a service management layer, we said, hey, this is great. It was outsourced for them, but when we went and priced it, it actually makes more sense for us to insource that. So we're going to go back and take all of our people that are doing change management, reporting, service level agreements, and actually invest in the right technology that they can use and some training to help them get better at what they're already doing. That's a decision where we decided not to outsource it at this time. So it's not only about, the vendors can always do it better. Where public-private partnerships make sense, we'll invest in those. But right now, where we are today, we just know we have to get better, and that's going to mean investing in the people we have.
That's awesome. That was a super comprehensive answer, and you guys really all addressed that topic in a really dynamic way to talk about how there's so much that goes into planning for a future of IT that you guys might not even know about yet. And as you share with other states and learn about what others are doing, that's a super cool way that you bring things together to make that happen. So I've got one more question for you today. And I want to start with Richard on this one. We hear a lot from state IT about how they struggle with competing with the private sector on things like salary. But putting that aside, how should states be trying to attract and retain good talent? And is it the work environment? Is it fun, engaging projects? What really is there to do?
Well, I'll harken back to my federal government service, and that sense of public service, that sense of mission, can't be beat at all levels of government, and I'm sure that's the same in state government as well. And so that's obviously number one. And I found that if you really focused on career development for people, you could attract the best and brightest in the government. But that does mean having the proper kind of training programs the proper ability to move people along a career path, to give them, and in fact, I found in government, we could at younger ages, we could give people more responsibility, more authority, more chance to grow than many private sector organizations can. So I think it's a fallacy that you can't attract some of the best and brightest. I think you can. Now we couldn't pay as much,
right.
but I think most people can look beyond that, particularly earlier in their career when they're trying to build their skills and abilities and their experience. Government at all levels can be very attractive.
And I mean, Nelson, you and I have talked about it a lot, but we've actually not talked about this specific issue. So I'm really curious, I mean, in Virginia, what have you seen and what would you recommend when it comes to attracting and retaining IT talent?
It follows on what the last speaker just said. We see the people who are attracted to state government because they want to make a difference in some particular area, Department of Corrections, or VDOT, or Department of Social Services. And what we do is we provide them the environment for success in owning it. And I've also started an internal discussion with my staff and say, how can we do to take individuals and move them laterally, to cross-train them, and give them a broad range of service, a broad range of experiences, so they get a chance to round out their career pattern. Now, to be honest, the time that people spend in state government tends to be relatively long. So, that's a good thing. But it's hard, if you're not growing the company, it's hard to provide a valuable career path other than, more responsibilities and more areas. And that teams is for the people that apply, that see that as an example of, hey, I get to do this effort, I get to learn more. That's the kind of people we want to hire and retain.
Interesting. I mean, Keith, for you guys in North Carolina, the iCenter and the Innovation Center is a step forward in this area, but what else are you guys doing to attract and retain good IT talent?
Yeah, it's we're in one of the most competitive IT markets in the nation. We compete with all the RTP companies, or Research Triangle Park companies, so it's a big issue for us, and it's going to be an ongoing issue for us for a long time into the future, I suspect. I think there's a lot of things. The Innovation Center was a great initiative. It helped move us to not only the old state government, perception that was out there, but moving us into a more modernized looking environment. So that helps. But I think that we also need to think about, the paradigm shift of, state government employees aren't coming to retire anymore necessarily from the state. So how do we balance out that workforce with the folks that have been there, to Nelson's point, that have been there for 25 years, that have done a great job, but what does that next generation look like? So, it's interesting, we had an internship program this past summer, and I sat down with all the interns at the end and just talked about what would attract you and your peers to come to work for the state. And it's flexible work environments, or work schedules, it's more collaborative workspaces. And it wasn't that, down on their list was money, ironically. I think we always think in terms of, hey, I'm going to go to the place that's going to pay me the most money. No, I think that future generation of millennials want to make a difference. They want to be involved. They want to see their careers grow. So I think we need to provide that environment that allows them to do that. Innovation Center is a good start to that, though.
Yeah, and I think, as a millennial, it's wanting to do, good work, but do it on your own terms is another part of it. The flexible work hours is a great example. I know that I wish I could, work from 10 a.m. until 8 p.m. instead of 9 to 5. So
that's why we get emails from you.
That's right, exactly. and so Morgan, we'll give you the last word here. I mean, your state does some super cool stuff like Facebook at Work, and what else are you doing to attract and retain some top IT talent?
We have a multi-factor approach. The first thing we did, my predecessor actually started before me, is tearing down the old IT job codes and rebuilding them. It was based on market survey analysis. We actually have business analyst tracks, project management tracks, software development tracks, and our salaries are competitive to bring people into the state now. The other thing is, like Keith said, is creating an environment where people want to work and come to work every day. We have the low cube walls, collaboration spaces. I actually moved out of my office and onto a standing desk on the floor right there with the team. We definitely have that open concept kind of feel. We're not quite there on the flexible work hours and locations yet. We're gearing up towards that. But what we figure is that IT people like to work on cool projects and with cool technology. We're trying to transform the state. A lot of our workforce that's been around a while don't have the skills of the next generation systems. So we can actually bring people in at lower pay scales that just learned this stuff in college and give them the opportunity to work at scale that they wouldn't necessarily get in the private sector, to give them that experience. If they want to work for us for 2 to 3 years and then go back to the private sector, we encourage that, because there's going to be a lot, especially as a shared services organization. We support all the agencies. So as my customers' needs change and mature, we're going to need to be able to react to those. we're going to be able to bring in good people, even if it's for only a couple of year projects, to help us with that. So far so good, but we have a lot more talent to attract as we transform the rest of Arizona.
That's awesome, and I think that's actually an amazing note to end on, because it emphasizes the great work that states like yours are doing, but that there's so much work still left to do on the horizon. So, thank you so much, guys. That's fascinating stuff, and thanks for joining us today for our live video special edition episode of Priorities. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Thanks again to Arizona CIO Morgan Reed, North Carolina CIO Keith Werner, Virginia CIO Nelson Moe, and Learning Tree International CEO Richard Spires for joining us today on Priorities to talk about workforce. Episodes of Priorities are posted monthly, so be sure to check back on StateScoop.com for all the latest news and events in state and local government information technology. I'm your host, Jake Williams, StateScoop's Manager of Strategic Initiatives. This episode of Priorities on StateScoop Radio was brought to you by Learning Tree International. Thanks for watching.